You'll have some prospects that get a lot of buzz early on in their last college football season. You'll start seeing them appear very high in mock drafts, and you start to wonder what all the fuss is about. Sometimes I think with some of these guys, it could be a matter of the programs that they play at. They get a lot of spotlight, a lot of attention. It could be the positions that they play. They've got some name recognition. It could be the way they're utilizing the systems that they play in. Especially those guys that tend to play in open space, they tend to be showcased more. It tends to be easier to see, and easier to kind of quantify, and it makes them more likely to stand out. But then as the season starts to go along, you start to realize more of the flaws in a player's game, and people start to turn on that prospect and sour on them a little bit, and their stock comes crashing down to earth. Not in the sense that they've all of a sudden just become that much worse of a football player, but it's now more so that the hype is matching the reality of who the prospect is. And a guy I think of when I think of that in this year's draft has to be Cravens, the 6'1", 225-pound kind of Swiss Army knife, do-it-all type of junior for the USC Trojans. This is a guy that was utilized at safety. He was utilized at linebacker. He was playing some in the slot as a almost nickel corner or safety, you would say. He was deployed all over the place, utilized in a lot of ways in open space. And as a result, I felt very early on in the 2015 college football season, he was getting a lot of buzz, a lot of attention. He played at USC. The system he was utilized in, the way he was utilized, allowed him to maybe be noticed and stand out more. But as people started to pay attention and watch more, you started to realize that maybe this was a good football player, but not a great football player. And that's kind of what I think of when I look at Cravens on film. Now, there are things I like about his game. I think this is a guy that, in general, has showed me a good ability to understand gap and contain discipline. In fact, when he's playing on the outside, he played outside a lot, like a lot of outside linebacker, 3-4, almost edge rusher in USC's defensive system in 2015. I really liked his ability to maintain his discipline on the edge, understanding that sometimes his responsibility was not always to make the play, but it was to prevent the big play by staying outside, setting the edge. And for a guy that's 225 pounds, he does a really good job of setting the edge, frankly. It's one of the most impressive traits that he has. And again, I like those guys that can play discipline like that, especially when they're not tremendous athletes. And Cravens is not a tremendous athlete. So he has to compensate for that in other ways. And I think he does that with his intelligence and football instincts. And one area where that is evident is his ability to maintain his gap and outside his contained discipline. Does a really good job of that, and sometimes made plays just because of that ability to set the edge and maintain contain. But talking about him, like I said, you talk first and foremost, I think, about his awareness and his instincts. This is a guy that has a really good feel for the game of football from a defensive standpoint, I think. A guy that has the awareness of understanding where he needs to be, and awareness and understanding of what is going to happen, what the play looks like. But to me, he also has those instincts, and instincts can be a little bit different than awareness. Instincts to me can be knowing what's coming before you actually see it coming, where awareness is a lot of play recognition, and once it happens, are you in the right spot? Do you understand where you need to be? Instincts are like that natural feel, that intangible of being able to recognize where you need to be shading, where you need to be heading, what you need to do before that play even materializes or develops. And when I watched Cravens on film in 2015, I really, really liked that aspect of his game. He's got more than that, though. A guy that's pretty good in coverage. Not a phenomenal man cover guy, but a solid cover guy. You'd feel pretty good about him maybe defending against some running backs and tight ends. But pretty good in zone coverage, I think, especially where, again, his awareness and instincts kind of come into play. A guy that has a lot of experience as a blitzer, and he's been a pretty good blitzer. Not explosive off the edge again, but a guy that has a good knack for creating some pressure as a blitzer, both outside and in particular on the inside, where, again, awareness and instincts can come into play by being able to recognize where to shoot the gap and when and how. But I love his versatility. A guy, again, that was utilized all over the place, so he's got a lot of experience playing in a lot of different roles. A kind of a Swiss Army knife, jack of all trades or many trades, master of none type of guy. But perhaps the single biggest thing I really like about his game, once you get past some of those other things, are his motor and his effort level. I always thought when I was watching Cravens that I was watching a guy that was putting forth his best effort. This was a guy that was trying and trying very hard. And when you have guys that don't have the greatest athleticism, they have to be able to compensate for that in other areas. And one of the easiest ways to do that is with hustle over muscle. It's with will over skill. And I see a guy that has hustle over muscle, that has will over skill, that puts forth a consistent effort, has a motor in pursuit, a motor to go make plays, a motor to not give up on the play once it's outside of his immediate vicinity, out of his area code, if you will. And I really, really like that about his game. But I wonder just how high his upside is at the NFL level, and here's a few reasons why. Number one, I've talked about his athleticism. 6'1", 225 pounds, maybe a 4.7s guy in the 40. That's mediocre for a linebacker, and that's flat out terrible for a safety. He's just not a very fluid, natural athlete. So one way maybe to compensate for that would be strength, but when you look at him, he's 225 pounds. He doesn't seem to be a very strong guy and doesn't play with a tremendous amount of physicality. Some physicality, yes, but he's a guy that you could see being engulfed by bigger, stronger blockers at the NFL level. And part of that lack of strength, I think, comes into block shedding. While he does a good job of setting the edge and maintaining his contain outside, once longer-armed offensive tackles in particular get their hands on him, they can pretty much take him out of the play. They can push him back because of that lack of strength. He's not good at shedding blockers. He's not a guy that's very good at anchoring overall. He can be blown back in the running game. Again, for a guy that's not the greatest athlete, you want him to be a better tackler than he really is. He's not really much of a hitter to me. Sometimes he will go for those big hits and he will miss the fundamental tackles, and sometimes he just frankly misses the fundamental tackles. Again, when I come back, and I come back to it because you're talking about a guy, you really wonder about him in terms of that lack of, like special athleticism. He's got some really good things going for him, but you would think one of the things that he would be better at is a tackler. Because that's one of those things that, to me, if you're not a special athlete and you're not the strongest dude, you've at least got to be able to make those tackles in the open field to compensate for some of those other deficiencies. And he just doesn't do that consistently enough. So it gives me some real pause for concern about whether or not he's really a starter potentially at the NFL level. Not a guy that I saw demonstrate a lot of great ball skills. But again, is that really going to be his calling card at the NFL level either? And then I look at scheme fit. And again, I come back to this because of that lack of athleticism, that lack of overall quickness, and in particular speed. You're talking about playing him at safety. Do you want to play a guy at safety that's a 4.7 plus 40 guy? That is a position where that speed does matter. He just doesn't have it. So then you're talking about playing him at linebacker. Okay, he's not going to play as an edge rusher in the 3-4, you wouldn't think. You're playing him inside linebacker in a 3-4. Maybe he has enough awareness and instincts to get by there, but not only is he not athletic, he's not very strong either. And is he going to get strong enough to where he can hold up? Then you look at a 4-3. Maybe he could play strong side linebacker, but again, he's 225 pounds. Do you really want a sandbacker in a 4-3, 225 pounds, that lacks that big-time explosiveness as an athlete? He could play maybe a weak side linebacker, and at his size, that's where you would best profile. But again, when you got weak side linebackers, you typically like your weak side linebackers to be, among other things, explosive athletes. Sometimes the most explosive athletes, because you might utilize them the most in man coverage against tight ends and running backs and slot receivers compared to the middle linebacker. You want your middle linebackers to have speed and range to go sideline to sideline, but sometimes the best athlete in a 4-3 defense needs to be the weak side linebacker. Well, again, so at Cravens, most linebacking cores he's going to go to will probably be the worst athlete, not the best athlete. Is he really a good fit for weak side linebacker? And then you look at middle linebacker in a 4-3. Maybe he profiles there, 6'1", but only 225 pounds. And again, lacking that explosiveness as a quick twitch athlete, lacking that strength, a guy that could get engulfed inside. I have a lot of concerns about where you're going to play him and just how effective he can actually be at the NFL level, in spite of the fact that he was, frankly, a really effective college football player. He was a guy, again, you're talking about, had a lot of early to mid to late first round draft buzz. A lot of people were mocking him as a top 15, top 20, top 30 pick in this draft. But I think as the season went along, the reality started to set in that, maybe everything is not as it appears here. And I think that's part of what it is that the reality came back to earth, and, the hype really came back to earth to match that reality. I love his football discipline, his IQ, his intelligence for the game, his awareness, his instincts. That's a football player. When I see Cravens, I see a guy that can be a football player in spite of some of his deficiencies, especially as an athlete. I love his Swiss Army knife utilization in the sense that he got to experience doing a lot of different things and be effective potentially at the NFL in small doses, doing a lot of different things. I love the effort that he plays with, but the fact of the matter is he needs to get stronger because I don't ever know if he's going to be an explosive athlete. And for these people that are sitting there comparing him to a Troy Polamalu, that is ridiculous. Polamalu, coming out of USC, was a fucking beast. He was a freaking animal, and he was a hell of an athlete. Cravens is not a hell of an athlete. Okay, he needs to get stronger. It's one of these things. You can work a little bit on quickness and speed and athleticism, but how much of that is ever really going to be a part of his game at the NFL level, I really don't know. Maybe he's best utilized in kind of a joker hybrid role where you don't have a defined position for him, but you kind of play him in a lot of different places. But at the end of the day, to me, he comes across as a real tweener type of prospect. And he may potentially be, because of that lack of athleticism, that lack of strength, a guy who was a much better college player than he was an NFL player. He becomes an NFL role player and maybe a solid special teams player. I think he's not a game changer by any stretch of the imagination. But I do still think he's a pretty good football player. And I think as he gets into an NFL program and he gets coached up, that you have things that you can work with from an intelligence standpoint and an effort standpoint that could really help him develop into a solid football player. I don't think he's ever going to be a star. I don't think he's ever going to be a game changer. But I think he is a guy that you would want to have on your team. He projects himself really, really well. I've heard that he interviewed really, really well. Here's a guy that I think somehow, some way, you could find a way to make him fit your defense at the NFL level. He's a guy that you would want to have in your huddle, in your locker room, on your football team. When I look at him, he is maybe a 3rd to 4th round talent, in all honesty. I wouldn't be surprised if he is a day 3 pick. He may end up as a day 2 pick, because of that intelligence, and coaches are going to like that. He's a guy that's not going to get beat badly in terms of screwing up his responsibilities, and that will appeal to some teams, and they can overlook that lack of athleticism. And maybe they'll play him in the middle in a 3-4 or 4-3, or maybe they'll play him at weak side backer in a 4-3, and they'll compensate for his deficiencies in other ways because of some of the positive things he brings to the table. But I think there's a chance that he could end up developing into an NFL starter. I think it will take some time. But I'm just not going to spend a pick in the first 2 rounds on him either. I think, again, 3rd to 4th round is the draft range for him. 3rd to 4th round is where he should go. But that doesn't preclude him, again, from not becoming a starter or even a good football player at the NFL level. Because when I watch him, there's enough to like that says to me, there's potential for a good football player here. He's just not an explosive, dominant potential type of football player at the NFL level. Hence why I wouldn't spend a really high draft pick on him.